Welcome back to another edition of the Dr. Bowser Basketball Podcast, powered by Sports Guys Iowa. We're back in St. Louis for an Arch Madness follow-up after day one of the Missouri Valley Conference Basketball Tournament. 3 games on the books, 3 teams have moved on, and maybe the biggest takeaway from Thursday, this tournament already looks exactly like Arch Madness typically feels. Every game feels like a rock fight. Defenses are ruling the day, and most teams are struggling to find their shooting rhythm in the Enterprise Center. It was physical, it was tense, low scoring. If you remember in the preview, we talked about all 3 opening round games yesterday, finished the under, but the history is when the over-under is set at 131.5 or higher, 67% of the games go under over the last 10 years. All 3 went under yesterday. Now the bracket tightens, the top seeds enter the picture, and the quarterfinals get rolling. Today, beginning at noon Central. And once again, I'm joined by one of the best Valley basketball minds that I know, Brian Duttler. Brian, welcome back. After one full day of games, what stood out most to you about how this tournament opened?
As we discussed in our preview, we talked about the Enterprise Center and shooting and defense travels, and especially in game 1 with Drake and in Southern Illinois, we were discussing about kind of 2 teams on 2 different kind of streaks. Southern Illinois winning 4 of the last games that they played. Drake on a 9-game heater in the wrong direction. First half, it looked exactly that was going on. The second half, the Southern Illinois came out, looked like they were going to try to take control in the second half, but outside shooting has been the bugaboo for the Salukis all season long. And for the game, 3-point shooting-wise, they were 16%, 4 of 25. Drake slightly better at 9 of 31. And as the second half continued to develop, Drake really took advantage of Southern shots, were able to get out on the outside and get some additional pressure on them, and then turn that defense into some pretty decent offense, and really took control of the game the last 10 minutes, and saw a Drake team that has been one of, if that Drake team had been that way during most of the conference season, they would not have been in that 8-9 game leading into last night's.
I think that's spot on. And so for those that didn't get a chance to watch games yesterday, Drake takes down Southern Illinois. The 9 seed upsets the 8 seed. Typically, those 8-9 matchups in a conference tournament are very close, but Drake wins 67-63. Brian mentioned it. Drake came into the game on a 9-game losing streak, but their win yesterday is actually their 10th straight win at Arch Madness, dating back three seasons. And so that is our recap of game 1 on Thursday. All right, now let's turn our attention to Valparaiso and Indiana State. Valparaiso ekes out a 63-62 win over the Sycamores. Game 2 might have been the most, quote, Arch Madness, unquote, game of the day. Valpo trailed 37-28 at the half. They fell behind by 9 in the second half, and then they just kept hanging around possession by possession until they stole it late. Brian, talk to us a little bit about your analysis of the Sycamores and the Beacons.
Yeah, Chris, it was truly a game of 2 halves, and sitting in the arena yesterday, especially in that second half, you just felt that Indiana State had plenty of opportunities basically midway through that second half to put Valpo away, and they just failed to execute on that. You start taking a look at some of the stats. Valpo ends up winning that second half by 10, wins the game by 1, and that's despite shooting 13 of 22 from the foul line. And just overall, in all 3 games yesterday, free throw shooting was not what you'd expect to see. As we talked earlier, the shooting in the Enterprise Center can be a challenge, but free throws yesterday for all teams pretty much involved was a little bit of a struggle. Valpo really took care of the basketball, limited their turnovers. They had 8 for the game compared to Indiana State's 14. And I don't have it in front of me, but I'll venture to say that a lot of those turnovers came the last 10 minutes of that game. So you had more possessions, positive possessions for Valpo, along with the attempts at the free throw line, even though they didn't make as many as they should. They ended up being able to capitalize, and it was a nice ending to the game. Indiana State did have the ball with few seconds remaining, and they had the opportunity to get that winning shot up, but it did not. Never had the opportunity to draw iron on that last shot. But overall, it was a good Thursday evening game.
I think one of the things that you talked to me about earlier this morning was that Indiana State only scored 4 points over the last 10 minutes of the basketball game. And so that was, I remember sitting in the arena and hearing you say, Boy, I'll tell you what, Valparaiso's just hanging around, and if Indiana State isn't careful, they're going to lose this basketball game. And when we looked at stats this morning, especially on the game tracker, that was really what jumped out to us, is that they only scored 4 points in the last 10 minutes of the basketball game. It's going to be tough to win any basketball game when you're only scoring 4 points in 10 minutes. And so now the reward for Valparaiso is a quarterfinal matchup with Bradley this afternoon at 2:30. And now the final game of Thursday night, maybe the game that a lot of our listeners would be focused on. The Northern Iowa Panthers take down Evansville 68-59 in a game actually that UNI trailed at the half 36-35. Evansville shot the ball really well in the first half, 64% from the three-point line, including a three-pointer from beyond the half-court line with 0.6 seconds left to take a 36-35 lead into the half. But in the second half, the Panthers started to exert their will a little bit. They defended well. They settled in, and they did control the game in the second half. Trey Campbell was the star, 23 points, made 5 threes, and had 3 blocks. Will Hornseth added 13 and 8. Tristan Smith had a really solid all-around game with 10 points, 13 rebounds, and 4 assists. And maybe the biggest number in the whole box score, UNI only had 4 turnovers for the entire game. They forced 14 turnovers and won the rebounding battle just by 1, 37-36, but survived a game where they just shot 6 of 28 from the three as a team. So, Brian, talk to us a little bit about maybe what you saw in this game.
Yeah, I think in the preview we talked about Northern Iowa's defense, and that still sticks out as the primary driver for how the Panthers got this game across the finish line. Coming out of the last media timeout, looked like Coach Jake changed a little bit of the on-ball pressure, bringing the ball up. Evansville, you could, from the jump, they wanted to do a low possession, minimal amount of possessions in the game. Not that we can't play that kind of game, but I think over the last 6-8 weeks, you can see that when the ball starts flowing a little bit more on the offensive end, UNI is a lot better. And to do that would be on the transition D. And really saw that with John Hutchins, right? He didn't play much in that first half, but the last possession or two really picked up that ball at three-quarters court and guarded. And that allowed the defense for us, I believe when I say us, Northern Iowa was able to limit where that ball was being entered. So rather than being at the three-point line, it was farther back, closer to midcourt where Evansville was starting their offense, which made their spacing a lot different. Turn that into the second half and using Leon Bond as that point pressure and picking up at that three-quarter court. And even in a low possession game, now Evansville is wasting a lot more time getting the ball off the clock. The defense is a lot tighter. Evansville did a great job, especially in the first half, getting the ball down inside. They had quite a few shooters in the corners that were wide open three, and 64% for three-point in the first half. Tightened that up quite a bit in the second half. I think they had 4 3-pointers, or maybe it was 2 of 11, I believe, in the second half or something close to that. Very minimal points and just enough on the offensive end for Northern Iowa to get the job done with just a spectacular job, especially on the second half on the defensive side.
I think one of the things that we talked about earlier, too, is that offensively, UNI seems to struggle when the ball sticks, right? When their offense is flowing and it's moving and there's movement off the ball. I think their offense is extremely tough to defend. On the defensive end of the side in the first half, I thought maybe UNI had a couple of guys get caught between where the ball was and where it was going. And so maybe they didn't recover as fast enough, maybe with high hands. And that I thought Evansville had a lot of really clean looks in the first half. And I think what changed in the second half was what you described. Maybe I would say it just a little bit differently. Those were more contested out of rhythm threes in the second half. The things that I think Brian described are 100% accurate, but I think what the result of that was, the outcome was Evansville wasn't as comfortable shooting the ball in the second half. But the Panthers get it done by 9. One thing that we want to talk about really quick and mention again is that all 3 games hit the under yesterday. And that mirrors the data that we got from our betting guru, Herb Cody, in Springfield, Missouri, that he said 67% of those games hit the under if the over-under is at 135 or higher, or 131 or higher. And so we'll talk a little bit about our Friday quarterfinals in a second. All right, shifting our focus to today, the quarterfinals, which start at noon. Our first game is Belmont versus Drake. Let's take a look. Belmont comes in as the league champion. One of the most efficient offenses in the conference and the team with the most pressure on it entering into the weekend. Drake now comes in with a little bit of momentum, maybe some confidence from yesterday. And one thing that you can absolutely not dismiss at this time of the year, Drake has won the last 3 Arch Madness tournaments. Brian, talk to us a little bit about maybe what today in Belmont versus Drake.
What I think is going to end up happening is this game's going to be close in the first half. I think everybody that has the opportunity to play on Thursday, whether it's a hindrance or not, later on Saturday or Sunday, but you've got your legs out from underneath you a little bit. You've gotten the run. You've gotten the use of the get used to the arena quite a bit. It can be. I think Drake's got a little bit of momentum. They looked a lot better in that second half. I think that's going to translate to being able to guard Belmont a little bit tighter in the first half, which will definitely impact some shooting on the Belmont side of things. But with the Conference Player of the Year in Lundblade and what they've got going on, and they're so efficient on the offensive side of the floor, I really believe that Belmont might be a slow start, but I look for Belmont to take care of things in the second half. You're looking at Belmont's a 13.5-point favorite, and the total's 152.5. Probably that 152 number might be a little bit up there, but I think Belmont won't have much of a problem in the second half.
I think so too. And one thing that if you've ever attended conference tournament play, right, the number 1 seed comes in. If they struggle even a little bit, right, the 8 seed, the 9 seed in this case, can grab a little energy. The arena starts to cheer for that underdog, and they really love the underdog feel. But I agree with your assessment. I think maybe Belmont starts slow. Drake keeps it close in the first half, but I do believe that Belmont will ultimately win this game and move on to semifinal Saturday. The second quarterfinal will tip off shortly after the conclusion of Belmont and Drake, around probably 2:30 Central Time. If this game's already predetermined, with only 11 schools in the conference this year, the top 5 advanced to Friday, and so Murray State is the 4, and the University of Illinois Chicago, UIC, the Flames, are the 5th. Murray State is a slight 1.5-point favorite, and the over-under is at 148.5. Brian, what do you see in UIC versus Murray?
I think the player to watch in this game is going to be Fred King. Based upon officiating that we saw in last evening's game, it was fairly consistent in all 3 games. There wasn't a lot of excessive bumping or anything along those lines that was being called down low. It was pretty physical action down low. And if that continues into today, I think Fred King is going to be an absolute monster in this game. UIC is going to be able to run some bodies at him, but that's a big boy. And what we can see is when the posts are able to play aggressively, be able to bang a little bit, that is when you see some of the best post play in the event. And I think Fred King is going to be able to push Murray State across the finish line. And will unfortunately, UIC will be heading home at 5 o'clock this evening.
I'll tell you what, I think a couple of different things. We've talked to a couple of other folks from around the valley, and this is the game right now today that is a 50-50 toss-up depending on who you talk to. There's some sentiment throughout the valley that maybe Murray State is waning at the end of the year and UIC is on the rise. And so I think your assessment's pretty accurate. If I'm a betting person, I don't know that I'm going to bet the line today, but I like the under in this one too. And if I had to make a pick, I might say that UIC as the slight underdog here, as the 5 seed, maybe jumps up and grabs Murray State and sends the Racers home. But like we said before, we think this one's 50-50. That's where we're at. We'll see who moves on to semifinal Saturday out of the Murray State UIC game at 2:30 this afternoon. All right, so let's talk about the evening session. And of course, between sessions, I think Mr. Duttler and myself will probably leave the arena and try to find some phenomenal food somewhere. Friday's typically a Maggie O'Brien's kind of day. And so after we wander back from Maggie O'Brien's, the number 2 seed, Bradley Braves, will take on the number 7 seed, Valparaiso Beacons. Bradley is favored by 3.5 points and over-under at 133.5 for the game. Valpo has already survived one tight game. Now they get Bradley, which is a completely different problem for them. I think Bradley plays a completely different game than Indiana State. I think one thing that you said on the preview is that Bradley can win any different way. Whether you want to play up tempo, you want to play slow, and you want to make it a half-court grind, Bradley can win either way. Mr. Duttler, what do you see in Valpo and Bradley?
I believe Bradley is going to be an offensive juggernaut in this game. I've seen it way too many times in Arch Madness, Bradley coming in and the offensive side of things and being able to take control offensively. Every year is different, but consistencies are always there. And usually Bradley on a Friday, that offense is moving. Outside shooting is going to be there. Valpo, I think, is going to have to try to play a little bit slower game. This one is going to remind me of watching the Northern Iowa Evansville game from last evening. I think Valpo is going to be somewhat going to try to stretch the game out as long as they can. I think Bradley's going to go up tempo. And I look for Bradley to have a fairly easy time in this game today.
I concur. I really think that Bradley takes care of Valparaiso today. I think that the Beacons really did a good job last night, but I think they expended a ton of energy coming back from that, and it's a short turnaround time for them, and Bradley's rested. They're the number 2 seed, and I really do believe Coach Wardle does a phenomenal job at Arch Madness. And so our prediction here on the Dr. Bowser Basketball Podcast is that Bradley will advance to semifinal Saturday. 9 minutes. And now everybody's favorite game of quarterfinal Friday is the 3-6 game, which will tip off probably around 8:35 tonight, the nightcap, and maybe the game where our alliances and our allegiances lie the most. The number 3 seed Illinois State Redbirds will take on the number 6 seed Northern Iowa Panthers. When we woke up this morning and looked at the lines, UNI is actually a slight 1.5-point favorite. And the over-under, actually, UNI's over-under yesterday was 128.5, and they finished with 127. Today, the over-under is at 125.5. So somebody in Vegas thinks that the pace of play will be even slower in this game than it was yesterday as UNI played Evansville. And I think the game will be half-court physical and defensive. I think every possession will matter. And I think that one of the things that I always look at is how many baskets for the Northern Iowa Panthers come off of assists, and what is the shooting percentage for the Panthers? It feels like to me, if it's 35% or higher, that it's going to be a really good day for the Panthers. If it's 34% or lower, it could be a struggle. Brian, we talked a little bit about the Brian Duttler methodology, about how long does it take a team to get from 50 to 60. I'll let you talk about that a little bit, but the Panthers struggled a little bit yesterday once they hit 50 points to get to 60. And UNI has lost 2 previous games to Illinois State this year, both very competitive, both really defensive battles. But Brian, talk to us, give us your analysis of the Panthers and the Redbirds.
Yeah, as in the Murray State and in the UIC game, I think this is going to have a lot to do with what happens with Chase Walker. If the officiating allows for some bump and grinding and some physical post play, I look for Chase to have a good night. It's going to be between him and with Will Hornseth for UNI and what kind of matchup that is. They've had a couple good matchups already. 2 different kind of players. Will's a little bit more of the finesse side, but over the last 4 or 5 weeks, man, his post presence, a little bit on the defensive end, but more on the offensive end, has been a lot more aggressive. And I look for a great post matchup there. A low possession, definitely, I think that's going to end up happening. And you just take a look at the numbers, and the experts think that's what's going to end up happening as well. But for Northern Iowa to have some success this evening, the ball's got to move. And happened in the Evansville game last evening. The first 12 points Northern Iowa scored, they were all within inside the restricted arc in the lane. They had that ball moving. The cutters were going to the hoop. We were getting layups. We were getting just short bounds or short passes. If we can extend that kind of offense again against Illinois State, get the ball to move, make that second pass. That was the thing that was in the second half we were really missing out on, is making that extra pass. And if that pass happens to go down inside, or with Tristan down low, or Leon going to the hoop, there's going to be some good offensive opportunities, which we're going to have to be very efficient on, and to do that. And the most efficient team usually is going to end up winning the game, and that's what's going to happen in this one as well.
I know it's tough for us to make a prediction on this one because we are such ardent UNI fans, but as I look to the Illinois State side, there's one player this year that sticks out. You mentioned Chase Walker, who's clearly one of the best big men in the league. One of the transfers to Illinois State this year is Skunberg. And I'll tell you what, I think he's a catalyst. He's one of those guys that is a glue guy. He does all the right things. He's a hustle guy. He gets 50-50 balls. He hits big shots. And so I know it sounds odd, but if you and I can neutralize their glue guy, if you and I can neutralize their hustle guy and not allow him to get those 50-50 balls and make those hustle plays, I really think that I lean towards Northern Iowa in this matchup. I think that there's a lot of emotion also because Landon Wolf, who started his career at Northern Iowa and is a Cedar Falls high school product, his dad played football at Northern Iowa, transferred to Illinois State. You can see the level of emotion that he plays with when he plays against the Panthers, and it's elevated, to be quite honest. And so I think his teammates sense that too, and I think that that's why these games this year have been so competitive. One of the reasons. And so, what do you think about that, Brian?
No, I completely agree. I think what's going to be the interesting thing tonight is with Bradley and Illinois State being in the same session, it's going to be a nice, fun, electric atmosphere. And for sure, in the first half of the game, most of those Bradley fans are going to stick around and gonna be having a little bit of purple on them, and which makes for awesome times in the arena because Northern Iowa will take all the help we can get, and that's including the Bradley fans cheering for the Panthers, and that stuff does make a difference, especially when you start getting some tired legs and you start going through 8:30 tip. That 9:30, 10 o'clock time frame rolls around. Energy in the arena has a lot to do with sometimes who's going to end up winning this game.
That's awesome analysis right now. So we're not making an official pick, but we would hope for a Northern Iowa Panther victory. That's what we're cheering for today. If Illinois State does end up winning today for a third time against UNI, you'll see an I-74 rivalry tomorrow on semifinal Saturday. 6 minutes. Whew. Thursday reminded everybody what Arch Madness is all about. It's not always clean, it's not always pretty, but it's always competitive. 3 opening round games and 3 tight finishes. Now the top seeds enter, the bracket tightens, and by the end of Friday night, we'll know exactly who is built for the weekend in St. Louis. For Brian Duttler, I am Chris Bowser. This has been the Dr. Bowser Basketball Podcast, powered by Sports Guys Iowa. Enjoy the quarterfinals. We'll be back soon with more Missouri Valley Conference basketball coverage.